You know, on one side, you've got banks with just trillions of dollars in capital. And on the other, you have a housing crisis that, let's be honest, feels completely unsolvable. It all leads to a really simple question, one we're going to unpack right now.
It seems like a no-brainer, right? Banks have the money, communities desperately need the homes. So, what's stopping them? Well, the answer isn't a lack of cash or even a lack of will. It's actually a legal wall, one that was built almost a century ago to solve a totally different kind of crisis. And this, right here, is the heart of the whole issue. The answer to that big question lies in this fundamental principle of U.S. law, a super strict legal wall that's designed to keep the business of banking completely separate from everything else, what the law calls commerce. This whole idea was born out of the absolute trauma of the Great Depression. The thinking back then was that the entire financial collapse was fueled by banks making these wild, speculative bets out in the commercial world. So to make sure that never, ever happened again, regulators built this wall. It basically forced banks to stick to one job, taking our deposits and making loans. That's it.
Okay, now here's a really crucial distinction we have to make. When we're talking about these rules, we're not actually talking about your local bank branch down the street. We're talking about its parent, the Bank Holding Company, or BHC. Just think of the BHC as the big corporate parent, and your bank branch is one of its kids. These super restrictive rules, they apply to the parent company, which controls the whole family. This little detail is absolutely key.
So this wall isn't just some abstract idea. It's constructed from very specific laws passed over decades. Let's take a look at how it was actually built, piece by piece.
You can literally watch the wall get built right here on this timeline. It all kicks off in 1933 with Glass-Steagall pouring the foundation. Then in 1956, the Bank Holding Company Act comes in and builds that wall higher and way, way stronger. And then as recently as 2010, right after the big financial crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act came along and slapped another thick layer of bricks on the whole thing.
So Glass-Steagall was the original blueprint. It drew this really firm line in the sand separating plain vanilla commercial banking, this stuff we all use, from the much riskier world of investment banking. And yeah, parts of this act were eventually repealed, but its core philosophy, that banking needs to be kept separate from other business, that idea stuck around.
But really, the Bank Holding Company Act of 1956 is the single biggest barrier we're dealing with today. It flat out forbids bank holding companies from getting into non-banking activities. And here's the absolute kicker. Regulators have said again and again that direct real estate development is a prohibited commercial activity. Sure, the Fed can grant some exceptions, but their power to do so is incredibly narrow. Then, of course, the 2008 financial crisis happened, and the response wasn't to loosen these rules, it was to double down on them. The Dodd-Frank Act came in and tightened supervision across the board with this intense focus on containing risk. And what that did was effectively make the wall even stronger, prioritizing financial safety over pretty much everything else.
Naturally, a law that huge is going to be controversial. You've got proponents who argue that Dodd-Frank made the whole system way safer and protected consumers. But then you have opponents who believe it just went too far, that it choked off credit and actually slowed down the economy. It's a perfect example of just how complicated the ripple effects of these regulations can be.
So we have this very clear wall, right? Built and reinforced over 80 years to keep banks out of commercial business. But here's the twist. There's another major law that seems to be pushing them in the completely opposite direction. And this is it, the Community Reinvestment Act, or CRA. Its goal is fundamentally a social one. It actually requires banks to actively invest and lend in all the communities they serve, but especially low and moderate income neighborhoods. And a huge part of serving those communities' credit needs is, you guessed it, investing in affordable housing. And right there, you see the central conflict, the paradox at the heart of it all. On one hand, the CRA is telling banks, hey, you have an obligation to help fund affordable housing. But on the other hand, the Bank Holding Company Act is yelling, you are forbidden from the most direct way of creating that housing. It's a perfect policy contradiction. So this isn't just some abstract legal puzzle for lawyers to debate. This conflict between the rules has tangible real-world consequences that are actively slowing down the creation of homes that people desperately, desperately need. The result is what one analysis calls a significant impediment to mobilizing private capital for pressing public good. What that really means is that a law designed to fix the crisis of the 1930s is now getting in the way of solving the crisis of today.
So what are the banks supposed to do? Well, they're forced into these incredibly inefficient and complicated workarounds. Since they can't build houses themselves, they have to go through this complex web of middlemen, like tax credit syndicators. This just adds layers of bureaucracy, which, as you can imagine, jacks up the costs and makes the whole process take way longer.
The bottom line is really simple, and it has a direct negative impact. These restrictions raise transaction costs and slow the production of new housing. More money gets spent on paperwork and process instead of on bricks and mortar. And at the end of the day, that means fewer homes get built. Period.
Which brings us to this final, absolutely crucial question. The entire system is this giant balancing act between two really important goals: keeping our financial system stable and meeting urgent community needs. But right now, those two goals seem to be fighting each other. The fundamental challenge for policymakers is to figure out if our regulations can be updated to achieve both safety and progress, or if we're just stuck having to choose one over the other.